This is the story of Mary Celeste, otherwise known as the ship that disappeared in perfect weather. On December 4th, 1871, the captain of the Dei Gratia spotted a strange sight in the distance. He thought it might be another ship, or perhaps some kind of floating debris. But when he got closer, he realized it was neither of those things. It was a full-rigged sailing vessel, approximately 280 feet long, with not a single soul on board. And the ship wasn't just abandoned, it was completely deserted. There were no signs of a struggle, and nothing had been taken. It was almost like the crew simply vanished into thin air. I mean, this wasn't some dilapidated old boat either. This was the brigantine Amazon, a modern and well-built vessel that had been launched only 4 years prior. It was a fast, sturdy ship that was more than capable of handling the rough waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And it didn't look like it had encountered any trouble either. The sails were set, the hatches were battened down, and the anchor was still in its place. Everything about the ship suggested that it had been ready to set sail for its next voyage. But where was the crew? This mysterious occurrence took place during a time when superstition ran rampant and theories about the supernatural were commonplace. The lack of an explanation only fueled speculation about what could have possibly happened to the crew of the Amazon. Some believed they had encountered pirates, while others suspected mutiny or foul play. Still others wondered if the crew had been abducted by aliens or suffered some otherworldly fate. To this day, nobody knows exactly what happened to the crew of the Amazon. But let us take a look at some of the most popular theories and see if we can shed some light on this haunting mystery. The first thing that stands out about this mystery is the complete lack of a storm. When ships went missing at sea, it was usually because they had run into bad weather. But this was not the case with the Amazon. The captain of the nearby ship reported that the weather was calm and clear, which made the sight of the empty Amazon even stranger. He described the scene as follows. "When I first saw her, there was not a breath of wind stirring. I could hear the parrots and other birds on board squawking and making a great noise. I at once came to the conclusion that the crew had left their ship and taken to the boats. The captain of the Dei Gratia attempted to hail the Amazon, but there was no response. He went over to check the ship out further, but he found no one on board and no sign of anyone who had recently been there. All the crew's personal belongings were still on the ship, including their clothes, food, and bedding. It was as if they had just up and left without a moment's notice, as if this wasn't strange enough already. Every part of the ship was completely intact. From the rigging, to the hatches, to the anchor, nothing had been damaged, destroyed, or removed. This detail made it even more perplexing, because it ruled out many of the potential explanations for what could have happened to the crew. If a storm had struck the Amazon, you would have expected to see some signs of damage. But the ship looked as though it had merely been sitting in port. To make matters even weirder, the ship was still carrying its full cargo of industrial alcohol and other goods. If the crew had abandoned ship, you would have expected them to take something with them, even if it was just some food or water. But they had left everything behind. It was as if they had planned to stay on the ship forever. There was also no sign of a struggle, which ruled out piracy and mutiny as possibilities. Piracy was common in the Caribbean and along the coast of Africa, so it was possible that the crew had been attacked and killed by pirates. But if that had happened, you would have expected to see some signs of a struggle, or at least some blood. But there was nothing. The ship looked as though the crew had simply left it voluntarily. And then there was the lifeboat. This was a small open boat that was used for rowing ashore. And it was still on the ship, just like the rest of the cargo. If the crew had abandoned ship, you would have expected them to take the lifeboat with them. But they didn't. They left it behind along with everything else. So why did they abandon ship? Why did they leave all their belongings behind? And most importantly, where are they now? Well, unfortunately, nobody knows the answers to these questions. We can only speculate based on the evidence that was available to the investigators at the time. One of the most popular theories is that the crew mutinied and then sailed away in the lifeboat. This theory is supported by the fact that the lifeboat was still on the ship, even though it would have been useful for the crew to take it with them. However, there is no evidence that a mutiny actually took place. There were no signs of a struggle, and the crew's belongings were left behind, which doesn't really make sense if they had planned to sail away in the lifeboat. Another popular theory is that the crew was killed by a sudden seaquake. This is a rare geological event that can cause the ocean floor to rise up and create a large wave that can sink ships. However, there is no evidence that a seaquake actually took place. And even if it had, it wouldn't explain why the ship was still afloat and why the lifeboat was still on board. That brings us to the most outlandish theory, the alien abduction theory. This theory suggests that the crew was abducted by aliens who were disguised as humans. This would explain why there was no sign of a struggle and why the crew left all their belongings behind. However, there is no evidence to support this theory, and it's most likely that it was just a figment of people's imaginations. In reality, we may never know what happened to the crew of the Amazon. The truth is that we don't have enough evidence to say for sure what happened. We can only speculate based on the information that was available to the investigators at the time. What we do know is that the Amazon was a well-built ship that was capable of handling the rough waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The weather was calm and clear when the ship was found, and there was no sign of a storm or any other kind of trouble. Crew's belongings were left behind, and there was no sign of a struggle. This rules out many of the potential explanations for what could have happened to the crew, such as piracy, mutiny, or foul play. We also know that the ship was still carrying its full cargo of industrial alcohol and other goods. If the crew had abandoned ship, you would have expected them to take something with them, even if it was just some food or water. But they left everything behind as if they had planned to stay on the ship forever. Finally, we know that the crew of the Amazon was made up of 7 men, including the captain, Benjamin Briggs, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter, along with 5 crew members. None of them were ever seen again. So what do you think happened to the crew of the Amazon? Do you think they mutinied and sailed away in the lifeboat? Or do you think something more sinister was at play? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching.